name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and
Sinners
at
now, the hour of death. Amen.
pray for us.
Saint Gabriel,
Pray
pray
for us.
for us. Saint Paul,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so this is our topic, the fifth class that we're having on the sacrament of marriage. And actually, the main sources of this class is the book by Karol Wojtyła, or John Paul II. He wrote it when he was still a priest and a bishop, entitled Love and Responsibility. He has written also two other documents, Familiaris Consortio and the Letter to the Families, which are very relevant and which expound in more detail what we're going to take up here. And then there's another author whom I did not cite here in the references, but I also drew a lot from him. He was a former judge of the Roman Rota. This is like the Supreme Court of the Vatican, and among other things, what they handle are cases regarding declaration of nullity of marriages. So this is Father Cormac Burke. He's an Irishman. He just passed away actually some months ago. He did his pastoral work for the most part in Kenya, and that's where he passed away. So, so there are three topics that I wanted to talk about here, or three realities that I wanted to interrelate. One is matrimonial consent. Okay, we're going to talk about the nature of matrimonial consent, and then the marriage bond. Exactly what is the marriage bond? And thirdly, conjugal love. What I want to bring out in this class is the inseparable relationship between these three realities. The valid exchange of matrimonial consent, the idus between the bride and bridegroom, and then the marriage bond that is formed as a consequence of the valid exchange of matrimonial consent, and then their love, which after their exchange of matrimonial consent can now be properly called conjugal, because before that, no matter how much they may have loved each other, you cannot properly call that conjugal, spousal, or married love. We're going to explain this point. And then we will end the class by saying a few things about how these three realities, inseparably related to one another, how they give a completely new meaning to the intimate relationships that a man and a woman have. So it's completely different whether it is within the framework of marriage and conjugal love or outside of it. So that is basically those are the topics that we will discuss in this class. So the first thing I wanted to take up is this question: what brings the marriage into existence? Okay, and the answer is the valid exchange of matrimonial consent, the idus between the man and the woman. And interestingly, this is also something that is important not to understand the class. The valid exchange of matrimonial consent has two, not just one, has two immediate effects. The first one, of course, is what everybody knows, the creation of the marriage bond. It comes into existence for the first time. And what exactly is this marriage bond? Well, it's the new identity, spousal identity, or conjugal identity that the man and the woman give to each other through their matrimonial consent. So it is described in the Bible as this new identity as being one in the flesh. In other words, it is the total, exclusive, permanent, mutual belonging of husband and wife in and through their respective sexualities. St. Paul is very emphatic and very clear about this in his epistle, first epistle to the Corinthians, where he says that that husband and wife should give to each other their conjugal rights. No, why? Well, because the wife does not have dominion over her body, but the husband, and the husband over his own body, but the wife. So, in other words, they have given themselves in and through their respective sexualities to one another. So, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church points out, very clearly that from the valid exchange of matrimonial consent arises, okay, the immediate effect is that there arises a bond, okay, which is this new spousal identity, one in the flesh, a bond between the spouses, which by its very nature is perpetual, so it is indissoluble till death do us part, and exclusive, so one man and one woman. So that is the first effect of the exchange of matrimonial consent. Now, secondly, and this is what perhaps will be a discovery for many, as it was for me also when I first studied the matter. The second effect of the valid exchange of matrimonial consent is that for the very first time, the love that the man and the woman had for each other can now be designated properly and truly as conjugal love. Okay, so before that, no matter how strong their love was, you could not call it conjugal or married or spousal. Why? Because conjugal love by its very nature presupposes this spousal identity that we were talking about, this marriage bond, that they're one in one flesh. Okay, so thanks to their spousal identity, thanks to the marriage bond, this conjugal love that they have has now been what you call institutionalized, or at least that's the term that Father Cormac Burke uses, to refer to the fact that their conjugal love, after matrimonial consent, when they get married, is now protected by an institution, that gives the whole relationship a reality which henceforward is already independent of the subsequent decisions or moods of the man and the woman. Okay, of course, in order to get married, they have to freely enter into it, but regarding the identity, well, that is something that that is ratified by the Creator, and they can no longer undo till death do us part. So, love, in other words, cannot be called conjugal unless it is quote unquote institutionalized at the same time. And what does to institutionalize something mean? Well, it is to give existence to a reality that that perdures independently of the subsequent decisions of those who brought it about. In this case, it's the bridegroom and the bride. So, in this context, we can understand why the very first act of conjugal love between a man and a woman is the exchange of matrimonial consent between them. Okay, so that is what Monsignor Cormac Burke calls the foundational act. Conjugal, whereas before the marriage, no matter how strong the love may have been, it could not be properly designated, or it could not be designated as conjugal. to the love of the man and the woman. So what does this mean regarding the nature of marriage? Well, this has one important conclusion, no? That when you speak of marriage, marriage is both conjugal love and marriage bond. Okay, so conjugal love being the soul of the marriage, that the animating principle, that it is that that gives meaning to the marriage. And but marriage is not only conjugal love, no. Marriage is also marriage bond. That new identity that binds them together and that perdures, even though conjugal love may have its ups and downs, as it usually does. No, in fact, it may even disappear. Although, of course, naturally, with the grace of God, it can always be rekindled. No, so and this is important to keep in mind, because sometimes you hear from somebody who maybe unfortunately has a very difficult marriage, saying, well, this is not a marriage at all because we don't love each other anymore. There's no love, no, so there's no marriage. Well, wait a minute. So marriage is not just love, no, it is also the institution. And that's also important to keep in mind, because it may also happen, that the romance period, not the quote unquote the growing in love period is attenuated after the marriage. It's like the guy says, okay, I already have my woman, or the woman says, I already have my man. And so then, then that expression, familiarity breeds contempt, easily enters into the picture. No, so marriage is not just marriage bond. It's also love. It has to be, the marriage has to be nurtured. The romance has to go on. In fact, you might even say the effort has to be intensified. Because of course there will be frictions, there will be challenges that both of them will go through together. So this understanding of marriage as both conjugal love, like the soul of the marriage, and marriage bond, which is like the institution that protects that love and gives it a lasting framework. That is what marriage is all about. Okay, and this is also important because when we explain marriage as a sacrament, that a sacrament is a channel of grace. Okay, that's what a sacrament is. No. It's a sensible sign instituted by Jesus Christ to give grace. And in a sacramental marriage, the source of grace is that marriage bond, the sacramental marriage bond, which we will explain in a subsequent class. So wait, just let me get to the next slide. There. So. And so this is brought about, both the marriage bond and conjugal love. This is brought about by the valid exchange of matrimonial consent. And what is that exactly? Well, the Code of Canon Law, this is abbreviated here as CIC, Canon 1057. CIC because it is Codex Iuris Canonici. Okay, that's the Latin, Code of Canon Law. It is defined as the act of the will, okay, so it's voluntary, by which a man and a woman, through an irrevocable covenant, mutually give and accept each other in order to establish a marriage. Okay, so those are the questions. Like Jose, you give yourself to Maria as her lawfully wedded husband. Okay, so that's the exchange of matrimonial consent. Now, notice here that the Code of Canon Law doesn't describe or doesn't use the term contract. Of course, although marriage is also a contract, but more properly describes matrimonial consent as an act of the will through an irrevocable covenant. So it's not just a contract which can take place. The object of a contract can also be objects, things. But the object of a covenant is always persons. And more specifically, it involves a relationship of mutual belonging among persons that implies love, that implies fidelity, that implies permanence. Okay, so paradigmatically, that's expressed in the Bible as I will be your God, you will be my people. Okay, that's the way God expresses the covenant relationship. That is the way God expressed the covenant relationship that He wanted to establish with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, and his posterity. That covenant relationship that reached its definitive form in the new and everlasting covenant sealed by the blood of Christ. So it's a relationship of mutual belonging between persons. And there are 4 basic conditions for the valid exchange of matrimonial consent. First of all, it must be freely given. Okay, so there must be no grave coercion, okay, or fear that is imposed to elicit that consent. It must be free. And then it must also bear upon all the properties involved in the spousal identity, in being one flesh, meaning to say it must be permanent, okay, it must be exclusive, it must be open to life. Okay, so not a single one of these properties should be excluded. Otherwise, the exchange of matrimonial consent would be invalid. And it must be made by qualified persons. Okay, what do you mean by qualified persons? Well, of course, a man and a woman, but also they must not be, under any invalidating impediments that disqualify them from contracting marriage. Like what? Well, like they don't meet the minimum age requirement. That's one possibility. Or maybe they lack reason for some reason. They may be mentally unstable, okay, or they may labor under substantial defects, permanent by nature, either physically, either psychologically or emotionally, okay. So these impediments that make them incapable of giving their consent to the marriage. Okay, so lack of due discretion, serious lack of due discretion, for example, or pathological emotional conditions that make them incapable of assuming the obligations that marriage involves. Okay, so that must be made by qualified persons, and then it must also observe certain procedures or formalities required by civil or church law. Okay, this is because marriage has a social dimension. It has a juridical dimension. Okay, we will also take up what are these laws of the church that affect marriage. Of course, the most important one for the time being, is that Catholics are required by church law to get married in church for the validity of the marriage. So that's the most important law that we can cite for the time being. So, but these are the conditions for the valid exchange of matrimonial consent. And once matrimonial consent has been given, then, well, the marriage bond comes to existence. And also, for the first time, that love between the man and the woman can probably be called conjugal. Okay, so more details on the nature of the marriage bond. So the marriage bond is an intrinsic element of conjugal love, meaning to say it is not a formality that is extraneously imposed on conjugal love because of social traditions, religious traditions, or legal traditions. I say this because there are some couples, maybe not here in the Philippines, no, but you find them, especially in the developed countries of the West, where they feel that the important thing, okay, is their love. That is what makes the marriage, the love between the two, no? And they don't have to go through the rigmarole of a ceremony, or much less a ritual, no, in order to unite themselves together, no? So conjugal love, again, cannot be properly called conjugal without being institutionalized at the same time. Okay, so that's why it's an intrinsic part of conjugal love. So what kind of bond is it? Well, first of all, it's a bond that affects the very identity of the spouses, the inner depths, in other words, of their being. Because now they mutually, totally, permanently belong to the other in their sexualities and everything that is conjugable. Okay, so because it affects their inner identity, it is an ontological bond. No? Ontos in Greek means being, so it affects their inner being. It is their being one flesh. So in other words, it's not just a moral bond, no, that involves like moral obligations. No, it is not just a bond that they should not, that they must not undo. It is a bond that they cannot undo. Okay, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. So, and this is because God is the author of the institution of marriage, no? And he authored marriage as an institution at the very beginning when he created Adam and Eve. Okay, so, and that's why also, yes, it is an ontological bond that affects the inner being, identity of the spouses, but it is also a sacred and religious bond. And here, I just want to mention that in all cultures, before the modern age, all marriage ceremonies were held within a sacred or religious rite or ceremony. It's only with the onset of the French Revolution in the late 1700s, and the onset of secularism, that the notion of a civil marriage, a non-religious marriage, came about. But before that, no. All ancient cultures, celebrated marriages within a sacred or religious context. So it is a sacred religious bond, and it is also a social juridical bond, because marriage is a relationship of unity based on justice. So in other words, it involves rights and duties that affect society as a whole, beginning with the children that may arise from the marriage. Okay, so these are the characteristics of the marriage bond. And of course, the three essential properties of the marriage bond: exclusivity, indissolubility, and openness to life, because of course it involves the total giving of one's sexuality, and accepting of the other sexuality unconditionally. So these are the three properties of the marriage bond. Now, just to end the class, I wanted to highlight the significance of all of this that we have discussed, insofar as understanding its effect on the sexual relations, the intimate relationships that husband and wife have with each other. Okay, so what happens if a man and a woman engage in sexual relations outside of marriage? In other words, they're not married. They have strong feelings for one another, and they want to express these sincere, strong feelings in a sexual way. Well, what actually happens is that if they do this, sexual intercourse is bereft of the proper meaning that it should have. And what is the proper meaning that by God's creative design, sexual intercourse has? Well, it is the unique physical expression of the total, exclusive, permanent, mutual belonging of man and woman in their respective sexualities. In other words, it's the unique physical expression of their being one flesh. Okay, so it is not just like a friendly handshake. No, you don't invent this. No, there are certain languages of the body that are part of God's great creative design, and we cannot subvert this creative design, by reading our own meaning, into the expressions of the body that God intended, for people who have become one flesh. No, so outside of marriage, sexual relations give rise to a fourfold injustice. Okay? This is something that Carol Boitiwa explains in Love and Responsibility. First of all, it's an injustice of the Creator, okay, whose creative design for man and human sexuality is subverted. Okay, so God did not, give this gift to the human person for the human person to turn other people into an object. Okay, so it's an injustice of the Creator who has created man unto his image, and of course the human body is part of that divine image. Okay, it is meant to express love. God is love. So it's an injustice to the Creator. It's also an injustice to the person of the other partner. Why? Because sexual relations outside of marriage turns the other person into an object. What do you mean? Well, that person is valued only insofar as that person satisfies your sensual or affective needs. Okay. Of course, here in this case, it may be bilateral or mutually agreed upon, but still, that is as far as the meaning of those sexual relationships can go. Okay, so the satisfaction of one's sensual and affective needs. Okay, so that's turning the other person into an object. And then thirdly, it's an injustice to the child who may be conceived, okay, by those sexual relations, because every child has the right to be born as fruit of married love. Okay, so a child is born for love. And if a child is born for love, well, he has the right also to be born out of love. And we're talking here about the marital act, which is an expression of conjugal love. So it's an injustice also to the child. Yeah, and that is why many abortions, by the way, are the result of this, of having sexual relations outside of marriage. So, and then lastly, it is an injustice to society at large, because the well-being of a society ultimately depends on each member of the society respecting the personal dignity of the others, and of course, promiscuous use of sex is always depersonalizing. Okay, it undermines the dignity of people. Okay, so that's why these are the fourfold injustice. Now, on the other hand, within marriage, okay, within the context of the marriage bond, within the context of the conjugal love, then sexual relations are justified. Okay. Now, before anything, Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, he says that he is using this word justified in the biblical sense of the word, where to be just means to be holy, to be good, to be morally upright, to be really perfective of the person as an image of God. So within this context, the sexual relations are justified. Okay, so again, not to justify here does not just mean to make legal or socially acceptable. Okay, but to be good, upright, and holy. Okay, so so they are justified before God, who is the author of marriage, And this is especially highlighted by the fact that in giving themselves to each other according to God's creative plan, actually what spouses do is actually they're also giving themselves to God. Okay, so without exaggerating, if it is performed within that context, it is an act of worship of God also. In fact, in marriage, it is a sacrament. Okay, so and then secondly, it is these relations are justified before the eyes of the couple themselves, who know that they're not using each other, but giving themselves and expressing the total commitment and permanent commitment they've made to each other. Okay, so the marital coitus, as it's sometimes called, the marital act, here is an expression of their and in a sign, okay, and of their conjugal love and identity, and it fosters this love. Okay, so it is justified before the couple themselves, and then thirdly, it is justified before the child who may be born of those relationships, because every child again has the right to be born out of love, okay, and married love, okay, that is permanent and exclusive, and also the child has the right to be born in the setting of the love between its father and its mother. Okay, that's why even small children are traumatized when they feel that their parents are fighting. They start crying and they become emotionally unstable. And then lastly, the sexual relations are justified before society at large. Why? Because in this way, society is guaranteed of stable homes and marriages, and that's very important for the proper upbringing of the future citizens who can really contribute to the common good of society. So, so that is the topic for today.
What about, there are some couples, especially in the lower echelon of our society, who could not really afford, church marriages and things like that. So they what happens is that they refrain from having marriage in church, but continue to live together, have a family. They have a wholesome family life and things like that, and yet because they're not married in church, they're not allowed to receive the sacraments. No?
Yes, that's
Economic considerations for them. I'm saying that there are certain economic considerations that would make it difficult for them to have marriage in church. Well and good,
yes.
there are some mass marriages now, no?
Yes.
So that those who are not able to get married can have a marriage, okay? But let's say in the provincial areas, there are those who cannot, since they do not have the means to have a marriage in church.
Okay.
And yet they live and have a wholesome family life, and yet they're not allowed to receive communion. How is that,
Yes.
Father?
Well, thank you for that question. That's very true. And that stems from how should I call it? It stems really from ignorance, religious ignorance. First of all, it is very common among people to think that a church wedding has to be very elaborate and relatively expensive, and so they opt first for a simple civil wedding, or they opt just to live together, to have a common law wife, for example. That's the legal term for it, a common law wife. They really want to get their intention is to be together for only one person, only one woman, and for life. That's their intention. Okay, so, and to raise a family. So common law wife, okay, common law husband. Now, that stems from a cultural misconception that has to be addressed. So first of all, in order to get married in church, actually, you don't need to spend a single centavo, and it doesn't have. You don't have to wait for a mass wedding. You just go to the parish priest. You can opt to get married outside of mass in a sacramental ceremony, just limited to the celebration officiated by the priest and in front of two witnesses. And that takes only about maybe 10-15 minutes, and it can be done in the sacristy or in any suitable place. So to explain, it requires explanation really on the part of catechists, so that people appreciate better the need, not for if they're Catholics, to get married in church. You say usually the reason that they understand immediately, is that kailangan kayo ikasal sa simbahan dahil sa may grasya sa Diyos dyan, may blessing ng Panginoon. But they understand that immediately, their explanation is needed. And then of course, but they say, well, we're still saving up for the ceremony. And then of course, encouragement, some encouragement is needed. You need to be guided, according to the terms that I just explained, and people actually will understand this. And sometimes the children are already grown up, and that's when they get married in church, because a person has accompanied them to talk to a priest and explain their situation, and then of course the priest will be very happy to oblige. By the way, that's what happens, when people come to confession, and then you ask them, when was your last confession? Naku, matagal na, Father, nung first communion ko, okay, when I received my first communion. And then you can see that they're already mature. Are you married? And then they'll say, yes, Father, civilly lang. And then, but they're there, they want to go to confession, but even then a priest cannot administer confession to that person for as long as that person is not married in church, okay? So what the priest usually says, encouraging words, of course, very encouraging words, it's good that you're here in confession, it's good that you're sorry for your sins, and but make an effort to get married as soon as possible in church, and then you can come to confession, okay, and receive absolution, then you can receive communion. But in the meantime, you want a blessing. Yes, Father, yes, please, blessing. And so I give them, they always leave the confessional very happy, okay? So nobody feels like deprived because of their situation. So, and then of course they already make plans, for the wedding. It can be a very simple ceremony, as I explained. Okay. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and very praise the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Saint Gabriel,
Pray for us.
thank you all.
Pray for us.
Holy Mary, our hope, Saint of wisdom.
Pray for us.
Okay, thank you.